Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is day 3, the concluding sessions for our Swastika Understanding a Symbol of Peace and Prosperity series of events. Today we have a very exciting lineup of speakers and panelists, as well as a sneak preview of a documentary that's being worked on by Dr. T.K. Nakagaki called Manji. So today's sessions, the first 2 sessions focused on the symbolism in various traditions, Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain, as well as removing some misconceptions around the linguistics of swastika versus the Hakenkreuz. Today, we're going to be hearing remarks from various dignitaries talking about the meaning of swastika in their traditions, as well as the importance of imparting the right education about this very important and sacred symbol and distinguishing it from the symbol of hatred, which is the Hakenkreuz. So we're going to have that, and then we will also have remarks by various other speakers and panelists who will be discussing the need for dialogue and understanding about this important symbol versus what we have been taught nowadays as far as the misconceptions around swastika, and why it's important that when people are understanding and developing a mutual respect for this particular symbol, that the misconceptions around the symbol are removed, and the symbol of hatred, which is Hakenkreuz, is rightfully denounced by everyone in the world. So it's important for us to distinguish between the two. Proper education allows us to make sure that future generations learn the right meaning of this powerful and sacred symbol versus what has been normally taught in terms of the education today. So having said that, I wanted to first welcome Mrs. Shobha Swami. She's the General Secretary of the Coalition of Hindus of North America, and she's going to give her opening remarks on behalf of KONA.
Namaste, everybody. My name is Shobha Swami, and I am the General Secretary of KONA, the Coalition of Hindus of North America. I extend you a warm welcome to today's event, the third and final session of our series titled Swastika, Understanding a Symbol of Peace and Prosperity. KONA is a grassroots level advocacy organization dedicated to improving the understanding of Hindu Dharma in North America. The coalition seeks to protect the collective interests of the Hindu community by working on issues faced by them and educating the larger community about Hindu heritage and traditions. One such issue happens to be around the swastika. Swastika and similar motifs have been revered as sacred symbols for thousands of years by close to 2 billion indigenous people all over the world. This includes Hindus, Buddhists, Jains, Native Americans, as well as pre-Christian communities in parts of Europe and Africa. For Hindus, the swastika is a symbol of peace, prosperity, and well-being, and is used as an auspicious start to festivals, pujas, prayers, ceremonies, even during the ceremonial start for students seeking to begin learning classical art forms like Carnatic music, dance, etc. Because it's also considered a symbol of good fortune, the swastika features prominently at many Hindu temples, personal shrines, inside Hindu homes, on doorways, and even on trucks and vehicles. It is unfortunate that such an ancient and widely used positive symbol is wrongly characterized as a hate symbol in instances such as the recent New York Senate Bill 2727. In addition, the swastika has been wrongfully associated with Hitler's Hakenkreuz. Doing so is a disservice to the indigenous communities that clearly were never part of any hate campaign, and also a disservice to the victims of hatred and bigotry. We recognize and acknowledge the transgenerational trauma of the 6 million Jewish people, 1.5 million Roma people, and others killed by Nazi persecution, and the chilling, intimidating effect of Nazi-inspired hatred on Jewish Americans, African Americans, and others even today. Hindus and Sikhs have also been targets of neo-Nazis and those who support Nazi ideology. Yet, the important work of fighting bigotry and racism must not inadvertently stoke resentment against other religious minorities and traditions. The important work of fighting hatred and bigotry should also ensure that the world makes a distinction between the swastika, which is a symbol of peace, prosperity, and well being, and the Hakenkreuz or the hooked cross, which is the emblem of Hitler and Nazi Germany. Hitler never used the word swastika, but instead adopted and misappropriated a new hooked cross or crooked cross for Nazi Germany. This type of cross has Christian origins and can be seen in various churches across Europe, Northern Africa, and Latin America as well. Hindus believe in the fundamental concept of dharma and peaceful coexistence and have never tolerated hatred towards others. On the contrary, Hindus have provided shelter to persecuted communities, including Jews, Parsis, Christians, Buddhists, and others, due to our inherent aversion to hatred. It is therefore imperative that we equip our children and our next generation with proper knowledge about world cultures and religions so that they can develop the mutual respect and pluralism that must be the cornerstone of any multiracial, multi-ethnic, and inclusive society. It is in this light that interfaith dialogues around swastika become very important. These dialogues can bring us together, help us understand and appreciate each other better, and lead us to a mutually respectful, harmonious, and peaceful coexistence. In 1880, noted philologist Max Müller warned German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann about the dangers of using the word swastika outside of India, and I quote, "I do not like the use of the word swastika outside India. It is a word of Indian origin and has its history and definite meaning in India. I know the temptation is great to transfer names with which we are familiar to similar objects which come before us in the course of our researches, but it is a temptation which the true student ought to resist, except maybe for the sake of illustration. The mischief arising from the promiscuous use of technical terms is very great. The occurrence of such crosses in different parts of the world may or may not point to a common origin, but if they are once called swastika, the vulgus profanum, common masses, will at once jump to the conclusion that they all come from India, and it will take some time to weed out such a prejudice. Therefore, such wrongful usage and association of the swastika has indeed led to a great deal of problems. It is our hope that individuals can learn to distinguish between the swastika and the Hakenkreuz, Hitler's symbol of hatred, and rightly denounce the latter for which it stands, rather than swastika, which along with its equivalents has been around for thousands of years and is used by many cultures as a symbol of peace, well-being, and auspiciousness. I open up a very warm welcome to each of you again and pass on the mic to Dr. Nakagaki from the HIWA. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shobha. My name is TK Nakagaki. I'm actually the president of the HIWA Peace and Reconciliation Foundation of New York. So this is my logo in the background, so at least you can see. So I'm just standing, first of all, for this symbol of the HIWA. That's the character that we use. So actually, I've been, this particular organization that I created actually 3 years ago, because I've been doing peace work for particularly Hiroshima and Nagasaki, more towards the atomic bomb parts. And, but I have been doing like over 25 years. Every year in August, I have a service for the kind of memorial service, but also together with a display of a different understanding what happened during the wartime too, and especially what it means to have even nuclear weapons. And so that has been one of the parts. But then also this particular thing is always related to the peace and how you create the peace, how you transform the kind of violence or wars into more peaceful living. So that's the things is a background. And then so I just started. And so basically the Heiwa Foundation now supports, first of all, the Hiroshima Nagasaki peace events in August, promote awareness of issue related to the proliferation of nuclear weapons and general issues in related to war, conflict, and violence, with the intent of taking a proactive approach based upon Eastern religions to create the peaceful world. The foundation works to give life to wish for peace. But when we say Eastern religions, first thing come up to in my mind, what is the most peaceful symbol in the Eastern world? I mean, connected to the different religions. And then the answer is swastika. And so that's also one reason that I'm here. And then again, continue for the mission, but it creates and support the program related to peace and reconciliation at the grassroots level, so that ordinary people will learn to live peacefully with compassion and love, transforming violence in our society to peace. So that's the part. So for me, since I'm starting from the Eastern tradition, and myself was born in Japan, and and then actually for me, the first time I encountered the Hakenkreuz in this country, or they call it swastika, of course, but the Hakenkreuz, and but for me that was creating the flower swastika, actually, on the top of the little roof of the flower shrine, which I made for the Buddha's birthday. In Japan, we create the little baby Buddha in the middle, and then then we have a little house with the flowers. And the very end, in my temple, I always create the swastika with the flowers. And then when I did it, when I was in Seattle, 1985, or actually 86, then the member of the temple rushed to came and said, "We can't do this here. What happens in this country, or West." And then talk about what it means to have this so-called swastika in this country is like related to the Holocaust, and so it's why do we need to harm people's feeling and so forth? They have to really suffer enough, and then so we don't want to bring those symbols. So after that incident, actually almost like more than 25 years, I'm more like the one who wanted to, maybe we shouldn't use this symbol here because that's, hurting people. That's not intention for this symbol itself. So if that's the case, maybe we shouldn't. But then after that, like almost 25 years later, there's one point I attended the Interfaith Conference, or actually we call it Mashamea Retreat by the Interfaith Center of New York. And then, so that's particular conference on hate crime. And one of the speakers, of course, we expect they're going to talk about swastika somehow. But then one of the speaker, the expert, said this swastika is the universal evil symbol. And so I asked the question, actually, so what do you mean by universal evil symbol? This is only, could be seen here in this country, but not in, Asia, many places. It's not dead symbol either. It's still, strongly alive. And then this expert didn't know anything about the swastika in the East. And so which means he doesn't really know either for what does that talking about. What they are talking about is a Hakenkreuz, not the swastika either. So from that sense, so I decided to change my mind actually at that point. And actually, Dr. Uma, who will be speaking later, was there at the meeting too. So after the speakers talk, and the Eastern people gather, religious leaders gather, and then we said, oh, this is not right. Of course, this is, the country, we don't want it to hurt other people's feeling, but then the understanding of swastika never be improved. Rather, it become worst. And then nowadays also, that particular symbol become the evil symbol always. But then that's not the reality, as the Shoba just mentioned about over thousands of years that we have as a good symbol. And then so for me, as a Buddhist standpoint, I think it's very important to talk about the truth. Right now, the things what's happening about this particular symbol, swastika or Hakenkreuz, become a taboo. So that's why people don't talk about it, and the people don't want to share the truth of this particular symbol. And I feel like this is an ignorance, but also this ignorance create another suffering the other way, meaning like people who have respect the swastika for many, many years, and now is a target of the one who are not compassionate, who are very, 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 what do you call it, kind of what sort of like hated by the others, so which is not correct either. And so this is actually the time to really talk about what does this symbol means. So in order to do that, I need to do some kind of dialogue, but then swastika is so much of related to the taboo, so it's so difficult to talk about, even short period of time. So that's why I decided to write this swastika on my thesis, or doctoral dissertation, basically, when I was studying at the New York Theological Seminary. And then my major was a multi-faith study, interfaith study. And so this is an interfaith symbol, and existed in the entire, I mean, at least the Asia you can see, but also this symbol is ancient. So you can find this symbol in a European continent, or even African continent, and the Native American, so the American continent, North America too. So it's all over the place, and that was normally used as a very good symbol. And so this is a book that I talk about, and then so finally after dissertation, I was able to publish this book, but it took about almost 8 years, because I finished this book about 10 years ago, but nobody wanted to, publish. It's because, anything swastika is good is no good in this country. So that's the period. And even like a parliamentary world revision, I try to talk about this a couple of times. Finally, last year, 2019, we were able to talk a little bit, but we have some, oppositions also. And so anyhow, sorry, I have to cut it now. So, but whatever the case, and then we need to start the dialogue. I'm not rushing to do this like, tomorrow we have to change, but rather we should start doing it and be aware of what really we're talking about. If people don't know what you're talking about, read this book first, then we have discussion. Because before, there's no fair kind of a discussion, meaning like we don't have much of information about the swastika itself. So many Hakenkreuz, evil one, but not many book, because fact is, as I experienced, if you wanted to talk about the right thing about the swastika, you'll be out. So your book won't be published. So anyhow, I'm very grateful for the publisher of this book, the Stonebridge. Yeah, they're brave enough to support this book to publish. So I appreciate very much. And again, thank you very much for today, for this great occasion to working with the coalition of Hindus of North America. So we're very grateful to work together and bring the kind of awareness and also the dialogue. And this education is probably the key for this. So I wanted to thank everyone watching this and also hopefully you can have more deeper understanding. And I hope if you missed the first 2 sessions, and then we talk about a lot of detail for the history and also like language-wise. So please go back and then check out what we had for last 2 sessions. So thank you. And then I hope you enjoy, and then this will be the learning experience for all of you. Okay, peace to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nakagaki. We really appreciate your comments and for your constant support throughout this 3-day event. Thank you so much again. So I would like to now introduce 4 dignitaries who we would like to get remarks from. The first dignitary that we have is Dr. Uma Mysarikar, who is president of the Hindu Temple Society of North America.
Namaste. Thank you.
Namaste.
I'd like to start out with a small prayer. Asato ma sadgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityor ma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Lead me from unreal to real. Lead me from darkness to light. Lead me from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, and peace. I'm very happy that we have gathered virtually here today to promote mutual understanding and respect by recognizing the misconception of the sacred symbol, swastika. I'm deeply grateful to Coalition of Hindus of North America and Haiva Foundation for launching this campaign to educate people of the meaning of swastika during this prestigious UN World Interfaith Harmony Week. This indeed is a great forum to educate people about this well-known Hindu heritage. The root word of swastika, as all of you have been mentioning, is derived from our ancient Vedic text, which means health, well-being, luck, prosperity, success, etc. Swastika is just one among many religious symbols in Hindu culture used in ceremonial events. We respect all the symbols used in different religions to us. Unfortunately, swastika has been misunderstood and misappropriated. It is crucial that people are educated with proper knowledge about this world cultures and religion so that they can develop mutual respect and pluralism. Hindus strongly believe from time immemorial that it is a sacred symbol. Embedded in it is energy and spirituality. I sincerely hope and pray that frequent meetings among different faith groups and community members, and of course those who hold offices, will bring unity, respect, understanding of our following a swastika symbol. It is very important, in my opinion, to spread the word among younger people who are today very dynamic in appreciating and understanding and then preserving our great symbol swastika. Thank you very much, and I wish you all very great success and my prayers daily for this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mysarikar. I would now like to invite James Lynch, who is president of the Buddhist Council of New York.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me here. As was said, I'm the current president of the Buddhist Council of New York. We represent about maybe almost up to 1 million Buddhists in the New York metropolitan area. Most of them are heritage Buddhists. That means they come from places like China, Korea, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Thailand. Obviously, looking at me, I'm not from one of those places. I'm a Black American Buddhist who is what we'd call a convert Buddhist. I was introduced to Buddhism in about 1976 through my late mother. You know, I had no knowledge, in fact, when I became a Buddhist, about the historical challenge of using the swastika as opposed to what the Nazi regime was using it for as a symbol of hate. And indeed, as someone who is was introduced to this issue actually by Reverend Nakagaki, who's here, I also sat as the vice president on the Haiva Foundation. I realized that many Buddhists in the community, many people in the heritage community, feel that they cannot say anything about this misappropriation of the swastika symbol by the Nazis. Indeed, as a person, I'm very sensitive to the issue of the suffering of people at the hands of the Nazi regime in the Second World War. Indeed, as a victim in my family, I come from slavery in the United States. And so I'm acutely aware of how the swastika in New York City was used when, as a young child, I did not have a good association with it, right? But I think what we're trying to do here in a lot of ways is, and it's already been said, and some of my remarks are kind of short because I'm not an expert in this area, is really the idea of education, right? The idea of separating the idea of the hook and cross from the swastika. You know, this is a beginning process. And one of the things I didn't know I had to speak in notes, but I thought as a Buddhist, and the practice as I believe things we should do all the time, is that as we rehabilitate, or not rehabilitate the hook and cross, but reveal the hidden spiritual dimensions that are with the swastika, what we should be always trying to do is to reduce people's suffering and to reveal the sacred nature of the people that we're talking to, and also to revere and reveal our own sacred nature as we educate other people. People are sometimes afraid. Sometimes people have misconceptions about what they are trying to do, or sometimes trying to stop others from doing things. I think one of the best things that I'm happy to be here is that we're trying to do something different. We're trying to put some compassion and love in the activities that we're doing to reclaim a lost history and a lost tradition that is part of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism as well. So I think that this is the beginning, the first forays, if you will, into establishing genuine dialogue on this issue and to make the world a better place. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to James Lynch. I would now like to introduce Bawa Jain, who is the Secretary General for the World Council of Religious Leaders.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you, everyone. First of all, I want to thank my dear friend and brother, Venerable Dr. T.K. Nakagaki, TK-san as I call him, and Mr. Nikunj Trivedi. I haven't met you, but I'm so glad to see the younger generation getting more and more active. I consider you young, and I hope that you will do a lot. I'm very glad to see my old friend, still very young and active, Dr. Uman Mysorkar. I've known her now almost 30 years, and she's just still the same, just amazing. I see my friend Naresh Jain, a fellow Jain, and many others. So first of all, I have to say thank you very much. Convening this dialogue during the UN's Interfaith Harmony Week assumes added significance to bring up subjects which sometimes are perceived to be controversial. We began this journey a long time ago. In the year 2000, I was honored to serve as the Secretary of the Millennium World Peace Summit. Umaji was there and TK was there. And, various leaders had come together and something new was buzzing in the halls of the United Nations. If you see since then, a lot has happened. I remember in 2003, following that, we took a delegation of senior leaders from not from Muslims or Christians, but the Asian traditions. And we took them to Israel. We took them to Israel and arranged high-level meetings between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The Christians were involved from the local within the Israel community. And the meeting was called Look, Listen, and Learn. Leading the Hindus was Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who we all know and respect. For me, he's been like a father figure. And their extensive meetings took place between the Jewish communities and the Hindu communities. And he is the one who actually first told me, Baba, we have to do something more with the Jewish community. So I started, it took me, I went on shuttle diplomacy almost for 5 years, back and forth to see we could bring together the two oldest traditions, the Hindus and Jews. Remember, all the religious traditions have come from these two. So the oldest traditions. We started to work together to see if we can bring them together. There was enormous opposition to it because of misperceptions, misunderstandings. The first meeting we managed to do was in India. I do not know whether you can see it, but I can send the links to it. That was the report from the first summit. And it was a very high-level Jewish leaders. I remember we touched on all the difficult subjects. And at a certain, of course, in the beginning, there was a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions, as I was saying. But we were enormously helped by a senior rabbi from Israel, who is a recipient of the Israel Prize 2 times, who's written the encyclopedia for the Torah a number of times. And he had been stationed in India. He had studied all the scriptures. And he knew the sacredness of the swastika to the Hindus and all the Dharmic traditions. So he became a great ambassador to tell the Jewish people what it meant, and that we should not treat swastika as a symbol of hate. So the report from the first Hindu-Jewish summit was printed as the chief rabbinate of Israel in Jerusalem, containing the swastika in it. This was all the senior Jewish leaders of Israel had signed on to it and realized that. In the second summit, which took place in 2008, then we went to Israel. This is a report from that. Okay. And in that, we actually addressed the subject of the swastika. If you see point 7 in the second declaration, you can read exactly what it says. I don't mind reading it to you all again. It says, swastika is an ancient and greatly auspicious symbol of the Hindu tradition. It is inscribed on Hindu temples, ritual altars, entrances, and even account books. A distorted version of the sacred symbol was misappropriated by the Third Reich in Germany and abused as an emblem under which heinous crimes were perpetrated against humanity, particularly the Jewish people. The participants recognized that this symbol is and has been sacred to Hindus for millennia, long before its misappropriation. And it is signed by all the major Jewish leaders. And this is all the senior most Jewish people that you can think of. This was done. But here is the challenge. What happened thereafter? We have not used it enough to create awareness and disavow swastika as a symbol of hate. So I think this is a great forum that we start to think about a campaign to launch a global initiative, especially in this country, because the rest of the people will follow, to disavow swastika as a symbol of hate. I've discussed this with very eminent Jewish leaders, the heads of the major Jewish organizations. I do so because last year, in the beginning of the year, we took a delegation of the senior most Muslim leaders to Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the Holocaust with the Jewish leaders. And the Muslim leaders prayed there at that horrible site, 200 meters from the gas chambers, where perhaps the greatest crime on humanity was committed by the Third Reich. Okay? And they unilaterally declared that the Holocaust must never, ever be allowed again. And we must recognize that and not try and disavow it, not try and say this did not happen. So I think the challenge for us now is, what I would hope that we get together with these groups and just imagine, launch a campaign in which the Jewish people stop reacting to the swastika as a symbol of hate. Rather, say this is sacred to the ancient traditions. And the Hakan cross was not the swastika. Imagine if we can do that in the Jewish people. The people who react to the swastika as a symbol of hate, they will have no fuel. If we can succeed in that, take away the fuel from them. Tell them this is a sacred symbol for the ancient tradition. This is possible now. Why? Because of the growing geopolitical influence of the Dharmic traditions of India. Under Prime Minister Modi, there has never been a better time than this to launch this kind of a campaign. Remember, in one day, literally, without the noble process of the UN, he had the UN declare an International Day of Yoga. Never in the history of the UN had a day been declared without a due process of going through the different committees and to the assembly. He did that. The relations between India and Israel and the USA, that is one of our sacred commitments which we had made during the Hindu-Jewish summits, was to form that alliance. It is very strong now. There could not be a better time for us to get together, get the right people, and launch this campaign. Take back our swastika. This is not a symbol of hate. This is sacred to us. Like the Jewish people, the moment they enter the house, they touch the mezuzah and kiss it. For us, we enter a house and we put the swastika. We do that. Why? Because it is sacred to us. It protects us. It blesses us. Let's get together and launch this campaign to disavow swastika as a symbol of hate. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Secretary General Bawa Jain. Our last speaker is Howard Aubin, who is councilman of the town of Swastika, New York. He's unfortunately unable to attend today due to a family emergency. However, he did send his comments for us to read to you all today. So this is what he writes. Our town, the town of Black Brook, received a request from an individual from outside the area to change the name of the community of Swastika within the town of Black Brook. We, the members of the town board, contacted residents and relatives that live in Swastika, and not a single resident would request the name change. Growing up back in the early 70s while fishing in the brook in Swastika, I asked a resident if he had any problem with the name. He quickly replied back that he fought Hitler in the war and he resented Hitler stealing the name of his town. That's when I first started learning the history of Swastika, New York. I also used to collect coins and was surprised to see a swastika symbol on a Boy Scout token made prior to Hitler's time. Swastika was named way prior to Hitler. My best friend is Jewish. He lives a short distance from Swastika. He urged us not to change the name and not to allow Hitler to define the word swastika from his grave. Once again, I'd like to thank all of our dignitaries, Dr. Uma Mysarikar, James Lynch, Bawa Jain, and Howard Aubin for providing their comments today. And I will now turn the program back over to Nikunj Trivedi.
Great, thank you very much. So now we're going to go into our next session. I want to bring in Adam Weissman and Yusuke Kiname. Both are producer and directors of the upcoming documentary by Dr. T.K. Nakagaki called Manji, which traces the significance of swastika in Japanese culture and other cultures, along with fostering a dialogue around swastika with other communities, such as the Jewish community. So maybe, Yusuke, you want to play the documentary, the sneak preview, and then we'll talk about your experiences.
Sure, sounds great.
My name is Toshikazu Kenjitsu Nakagaki, so people call me TK as a initial part. And I myself was born in Japan, in Osaka, and I came to the United States in 1985. So actually I live here about 35 years in this country, United States. Right now, it seems like in terms of swastika or the Hakenkreuz, we just need a little more information available so that people can read and see. 一応じゃあここにあるその曼字っていうのは基本的には仏教のシンボルっていうような形で考えても全然問題はないっていう形。
Pretty shocked to see it here, to be honest with you. I didn't expect it to be in a temple of all places or a shrine. I think just because it has such a negative connotation.
140年ぐらい前に、関東地域の かなり広範囲の地図を作りました。その時に地図記号を定めております。その最初の時から曼字の記号をお寺に使ってございます。
アメリカ人は何をもって自分をアメリカ人として見るか、日本人は何をもって日本人として見るかってところに考えるときに、日本人で結局まだ悲しいところ血なんですよね。でもアメリカ人って結局例えば朝とかに旗に忠誠を誓うとかそういうのあるんですよね。 だから旗が持つ意味って多分シンボルが持つ意味多分かなりもっと日本人とは違う感覚持ってるから。
もう3000万人の外国の旅行者が日本に来ていただいてますし、オリンピックに向けておそらく数はどんどん増えていくと思いますので、だんだんこの卍の記号って何なのって思う方は増えてくるんだと思うんですね。でその時にこういう背景がある、こういう歴史的な背景があるということを、やはりきちんと理解をしてもらうというのは大事だと思いますが。
Symbols require us to be careful. Hate crimes here in the city have increased immeasurably in the last couple of years, and now the swastika is being painted in all kinds of places. So I think it's important, particularly for Buddhists and perhaps more generally for many Asians, to understand what a provocative and negative symbol it is when used as part of white supremacy, white nationalism, anti-Semitism.
It was used as a trademark, or at least a supplementary mark for many products, because in history it represented good fortune, good luck, the four seasons, any number of more deeply symbolic and or spiritual things.
But to try and convince people who still are bearing the scars of that use of swastika, because whether Hitler called it that or not, if the last thing the person you love most in the world experienced was a person wearing that symbol, blowing their brains out, what they called it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. To them, it doesn't matter. And that, no, there's no maybe. That's the problem here. If in the end, historical reconstruction
卍を通してじゃあもう少しそこにダイアログが生まれていく、だから対話が生まれていくっていうのが一番私としては大切なことで、その平和っていうのを私はずっと考えてきてるから、平和のシンボルっていうことはやっぱりどういうふうに相手を理解するか、お互いを理解していくかっていうのがすごく大切になってくると思うんで、だからそのシンボルをね、蘇らせることっていうのはある意味で人類の歴史をちゃんと蘇らさせてもらうことにもなるし、ヘイトクライムもどうやってできてるかもよくわかると思うんですよね。
Great. Thank you both. That was wonderful. Did we lose Adam? We may have lost. Let me see where he is. Oh, here he is. Okay, perfect. So yeah, I mean, this was a great documentary, and you had put the URL also for supporting the project. You are looking for fiscal sponsorship, so it'll be great if people donate to this. And it's a documentary that'll bring out a lot of dialogue around the symbol and different perspectives on Hitler's Hakenkreuz versus the swastika, which is sacred to Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains. So what I want to do is quickly maybe get your perspectives. Maybe we'll start with Yusuke. How was the experience with you, both of you, working on this documentary itself?
Oh yeah, thanks for having us. Well, when I met CK 2 years ago and read the book, it was definitely eye-opening and fascinating because there's so much information that I didn't previously know. I grew up partly in the States and partly in Japan. And like you saw in the teaser trailer right there, in Japan, the swastika, or manji as they call it, is a map symbol for Buddhist temples. So I knew that there was a connection with Buddhism, but it didn't really go beyond that. And here in the States, it has such a negative connotation. It's so taboo that it's never really discussed. And there are blanks sort of in my knowledge of the swastika. And Reverend Nagagi's book kind of filled those gaps. And I thought it was important that we have a documentary that kind of talks about that and opens up the conversation, even asks the question whether Western society is ready to talk about and have a dialogue about this symbol. And for the most part, it's been great. I mean, obviously, we've had some times where we couldn't talk to certain people or turned down, but in general, I think people have been very open. But like you said, on the funding side of things, it has been an uphill battle because of the topic. And there's a link in our Facebook page or our Instagram page, but yeah, it's just been a little bit tough on that end. But so far the experience has been great. We've been meeting a lot of people that I would otherwise not have met and spoken to.
Great, thank you. And Adam, maybe sharing your perspective. Naturally, you know, you're not Japanese, nor are you Hindu or anything like that, you know, Buddhist or anything. So it was interesting when I saw your name on this documentary, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why would someone who has a Jewish heritage want to work on this documentary? So maybe you want to share your thoughts.
Yeah. So first off, the reason, or I guess the impetus behind why we started making this film in the first place was literally Yosuke and I were grabbing lunch after watching a movie. And he started telling me about this priest who had written a book, a Buddhist priest who had written a book about the swastika and trying to bring it back and the challenges that he was facing. And this was maybe 4 months after TK had actually just published the English version of his book. So that as a concept was fascinating in itself. And just a little bit about my background and why I was sort of compelled to get involved with this, with Yosuke. I do come from a pretty Jewish community in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and actually went to Hebrew school up through my teens. So my sense of the swastika growing up was purely associated with Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. And I can tell you, as a young Jewish person, especially one that's going to Hebrew school, you're taught from a very early age about the Holocaust, and the symbol, the Nazi symbol, is something that you're essentially taught to fear. Beyond that, if you are a Jew of European ancestry and you know others, or your family, or you have other family that's a Jewish European ancestry, it's almost inevitable that, at least when you're younger, you're going to come across Holocaust survivors. My wife's grandparents were both Holocaust survivors. I, growing up, met so many. I remember even in school, we would meet Holocaust survivors and do projects on them. And this was, in the 90s when there were a lot more of them, because the reality is this is 2 generations above me, and a lot of them are starting to pass away. So that was my general understanding of it for most of my childhood through my teenage years until I attended college, took an Eastern philosophy class. And I remember opening up my book one day on the chapter on Buddhism, and there was just a swastika right there in front of my face. And as a Jewish person growing up only understanding the Nazi background, or the Hakenkreuz as it is, you get this guttural feeling in the pit of your stomach every time you see it. And then learning about the Buddhist tradition kind of started, putting that to the wayside. But the reality is, after I took that course, it was out of my mind. And it wasn't until about a decade later, when Yosuke and I were sitting around talking about this book, and I decided, all right, it's time to order a copy of the book and read it. And it comes in the mail, and you just see this giant swastika on the cover. And I tell you, I could not, I read through it in a matter of days, but I definitely did not read it on the subway. There was absolutely no chance. And that's sort of been, as Yosuke was alluding to, some of the challenges that we've had, that even though from an intellectual and logical and rational perspective or approach, it makes perfect sense to integrate the swastika in our lives and try to get rid of this Nazi connection that so many of us associate with. It's really difficult to, because there are all these emotional pieces that so many of us still attach to it. And just giving lectures or explaining, oh no, it actually is thousands of years old, and there are many cultures across the world that use this symbol only for good. It's not enough. And part of the film isn't so much necessarily pushing the education on the one hand of this is what the swastika means for so many people in the world. It's a positive thing, but it's also opening up that dialogue, because there is no way to bring about change without having a conversation. You cannot have the education on one hand without other people's perspective on the other pushing back at it. And that's really what this film has been exploring. As I'm sure you could tell from that little teaser that we showed, we interviewed a ton of people on both sides. And having both of those sides presented at once, and as you can see, there were even some heated conversations happening towards the end, was really the most crucial part of this film that we're putting together.
Absolutely, yeah. And like you said, there's definitely those instances we have seen even within universities, even within our homes. I can tell you in my own, in my experience working with the Hindu community, there was a person who had put the swastika on their doorstep, right? And cops were called saying, this guy, this person, these people living here are Nazis, right? So cops come over, they're like, find a bunch of Indian people in there, like, well, they're not Nazis, who are. So then they have to explain, so similarly, there was a handyman who came and he refused to work on a project in that house because he saw a swastika in the house, right? So when you enter into a Hindu home, many Hindu homes actually have a swastika, right? So, so that's where the education, I think, is very important, and naturally keeping the sensitivities around the topic. So I'm glad that both of you are working on this project, and naturally we'll be happy to provide any support we can on our end. But promoting that dialogue, promoting that information is really, really important. And this week with UN Interfaith Harmony, World Interfaith Harmony Week, I think it's a great start for us. So thank you both for joining. Next, I'd like to invite Jeff Kelman. Jeff is a graduate student at Gratz College, and he is a master's candidate in Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And I got to know Jeff just maybe a few days ago, right, about a week or so ago. And we started talking about this topic. So I'm glad you're joining, Jeff. And like I said, I think it's important to get your perspective about the documentary, but about the subject in general. Go ahead.
Thank you, Nikunj, for sure. And I'll get this right. The first time I said shukriya, and he very quickly made sure I said, no, it says actually dhanyavad is the correct thank you. So it's important, I think, to always know what you're talking about with words as well. The nuances do matter. A little quick piece on my background, and there's a lot to discuss here, so I'll try and keep this fairly brief. But personally, I grew up Jewish, grew up in the Boston area. Live in southern New Hampshire now. I grew up going to a Jewish day school at one point in a, you could call it borderline reform conservative Jew. I'm certainly not Orthodox, otherwise I wouldn't be speaking here on a Saturday. But nevertheless, don't eat pork, don't eat shellfish, don't mix meat and milk. I do some basic brachas, which is Hebrew word for prayers on Shabbat, lighting prayers and different things. So, I value my Judaism. I've been to Israel. I've been to Poland, the Czech Republic, other areas, touring different death camps and the killing centers. Went to a Jewish day school in high school, which is in the Boston area, where I had, Talmud, Tanakh, Jewish thought classes. And so very much similar to Adam, grew up seeing these, what I'll now begin to refer to as the Hakenkreuz, or the hooked cross, as very much this symbol to be hated, and rightfully so when we're referring to the Hakenkreuz. But so often those two symbols get blended together when it's the Hakenkreuz or the swastika itself, which I think very much is something we need to make a distinction on. And there's really 3 points that I want to kind of go through here from now, as to both from a Jewish perspective as well as from an academic perspective, because one other component of my background I'll mention is I'm currently undertaking a master's degree in Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and my thesis is looking at the role of these various symbols, both the Hakenkreuz, the swastika, and the cross or the crucifix, and what various different symbols within different contexts, how they may inspire violence and aggressive action. But back to these kind of 3 points that I wanted to go through. So the first piece is that I think very often different groups here from a Jewish piece, we confuse shapes and symbols. And to qualify that, I'd say that shapes, of course, might just include something as simple as a line, a triangle, a circle, a square. There's a variety of shapes. Even simply the lines, the way that they're placed on a paper, without any context for a swastika or a Hakenkreuz, putting those left, whether it's left facing, right facing, whether it's 45-degree angle or not, that by itself, of course, is simply a shape. It's when you bring together the colors, it's when you bring together the intent, it's when you bring together the context forward that it becomes a symbol. And oftentimes a symbol as well, by itself, with all of these things. So in the case of the Hakenkreuz, or the Nazi use of the shape,
when it is at that 45-degree angle, when it is right-facing lines, when it is with a white background with a red, broader background. I think that's what we can all universally agree to call a Hakenkreuz or a hooked cross, and something that does come with a great deal of rightfully deserved negative connotations. On the other side, there's swastikas, there's crosses, there's stars of David. There's lots of different symbols there with different connotations. And it's just intriguing to me that throughout my studies, we looked at, throughout my studies of the Holocaust and Jewish anti-Semitism going back hundreds of years, really Christianity, for the most part, only started changing its tune around 1965 with Vatican II from the Catholic Church, with this thing, promulgation called Nostra Aetate, which meant in our time, and where they started to really remove a lot of that traditional anti-Semitism. But the cross and the crucifix themselves, going back hundreds of years, have a good deal of charged energy within there that intriguingly to me is not attached in the same way that you see with these other symbols. The second point that I'd make is that when it comes to this East versus West perspective, you'll hear voices within the Jewish community and within academia saying that these symbols are, specifically the Hakenkreuz, is seen as evil, or the swastika, rather, as they term it, is permanently irredeemable, and that in the West, we know it's seen as benign and it's seen as sacred, and it really has never been weaponized in the same way in the West. But I think one of the things is when they make a distinguishing piece of saying, look, that's fine in the West, but in the East, we really can't allow it to be redeemed here. And then at the same time, we think of this as, at least the United States, as this great melting pot that completely ignores or deprioritizes, I might say, any of the Hindu communities, the Jain communities, Buddhist communities, Native American communities, and others on a permanent basis, saying that never again in those areas within this melting pot will we ever be able to use this symbol. And then the third kind of point to consider here, I think, is the Jewish community often there's, and this sort of a point broadly to consider, especially when laws are involved, but really the difference between intent and the real world result or the impact of any particular policy or law. And I think the intent so often with the opinions and everything voiced from the Jewish community is that we must cancel, we must silence, we must remove the powers of hate and aggression and violence and any weaponized form that this symbol may have. But that has been, we know from today and going backwards to World War II and a bit before, that has been the policy of ostracizing this symbol, of looking at it in a negative light. And with that being the case, even illegal, it's illegal to use in many respects this shape of the Hakenkreuz, which again, unfortunately, is interchangeably used with the swastika. But this shape is demonized today, and yet it's used because I think there is a seductive power that comes from the taboo for the neo-Nazis, for the alt-right individuals. We see in the West widespread continued use of the Hakenkreuz in a weaponized fashion. So when there are voices that say, we have to wait until it's no longer used in this negative way, I think that is not realizing the fact that without a proactive stance, it will always continue to be used in that fashion. Without a proactive, positive, rebutted use, so that it has had for thousands of years going back and further. So those were kind of some of the 3 points that, just from my own perspective, I wanted to bring to the table, and that I'm researching throughout my thesis. I think the cross component is an interesting one that certainly needs to be discussed more. But at the same time, this is about, I think, taking away the negative aspects of a lot of these symbols, more so than just shifting it away to one side or another.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. Great comments. And I think to your point, a lot more dialogue needs to happen. A lot of nuances have to be put into place in order for us to really separate the two, right? The swastika versus the Hakenkreuz. And I think I'm really excited to see what your final product comes out. If we can stay in touch, would love to see what your paper comes out and what your master's thesis comes out to be. And someday, I hope that you write a book on this topic as well, because you have some very interesting thoughts. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Next, I'd like to get started with our panel. We have 4 esteemed guests, bringing Dr. T.K. Nakagaki, who's the president and founder of Heiwa Foundation. We also have Pandit Satish Sharma ji, who's the director of the Global Hindu Federation, joining us from the UK. We also have Sri Naresh Jain, who's the director for the Federation of Jain Associations of North America, or Jaina. And we have Reverend Monshin Paul Naman, who is the abbot from the Tendai Buddhist Institute. Namaste and welcome to everybody. If you would like to maybe unmute yourself, that would be great. When you're talking, please unmute yourself. And when you're not talking, you can mute yourself. So what I want to do first, maybe we can go quickly, describe the importance of the swastika as a symbol in your respective traditions, whether it's the Buddhist tradition, or whether you're from a particular country like Japan, or Buddhist tradition in America, as well as the Hindu and the Jain traditions. So we'll start with Dr. Nakagaki. Maybe you want to take a couple of minutes to just talk about this, because I think some people may have not joined the first few days. So maybe give a quick summary in a couple of minutes about the importance of swastika in Japanese culture as well as in Buddha Dharma.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, since I presented already, so I wasn't really prepared for that particular parts of the showing some of the pictures, but I guess I do have a background. So maybe you can pay attention to my background of screen, so I can show as I speak. But first of all, for Japanese or Buddhist, this is a very significant, important symbol, because even temple means maybe I'll show you. First of all, the normal people of Japanese know the swastika is this. Maybe I'll just, first of all, maybe I have to get out from my screen a little bit. See, like this. So you see a lot of different things. This is a map. Actually, Japan has a lot of map all over the place, like parks and everywhere, like stations and so forth. And then when you see those swastika, that means Buddhist temple. And the one that you see on the top, maybe right here, sorry, this one. Oh, my fingers could disappear. But anyway, that's like a Shinto shrine, Shinto temple, So the swastika symbol, that's the temple. So actually everybody knows that's a Buddhist temple as a common sense. And then this is the one that they mentioned in the film too. This is about, actually the swastika has been always swastika as a Buddhist temple from when they started the map, like new system of map. So it is the kind of identify with the swastika with the Buddhism in Japan, definitely. And then when you look at the sutras, I actually cover some of the part of the sutra, but then that's also the part of the things. So like this is actually Korean, the Buddha's birthday parade. We just use swastika this way, or this is the oldest temple in Japan. There was about 1600 years ago. So but then this temple is called Zenkoji in Nagano, where the Olympics supposed to start one time, but then they didn't. So which is in a way lucky, but this particular temple has a lot of swastika. It's the oldest temple in Japan, and then the swastika represents the good fortune, or actually the enlightenment, the Buddha's enlightenment. So like when you see the statue, this the swastika on the statue of the Buddha, this is only the Buddha, enlightened, fully enlightened one, can have. But then the Bodhisattva cannot have the swastika on the chest. And so this particular symbol represents the kind of really highest symbol of anything, that no higher than this symbol in Buddhism in that way. And so that sometimes there's a scripture talking about the swastika spread the light, and then those light cover entire universe and bring the peace and then the harmony, and then transform the evil thinking like violence, anger, greed, and so forth. So that's the part of the understanding of the Buddhism in general. I mean, it's just very kind of quick, but at least you get a little sense of that. Is that?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. We'll turn to Satish Sharma ji. Satish ji, maybe you want to give a few thoughts about the importance of swastika in the Hindu tradition.
Pranam ji, namaskar, and Om to everybody. One of the disadvantages of being so late in the program is that most people have already said much of what you were going to say. And I don't want to belabor the point of the auspiciousness of this symbol. I would just toss in that according to the latest dating, the Ramayana occurred 12,209. The battle between Ram and Ravan occurred in 12,209 BC. So that's a long time ago, BCE. And even in the accounts of the Ramayana, the Vedas are described as the ancient Vedas. So they were ancient at that time. And in the Vedas, we have multiple mentions of the swastika. So starting from where we are looking for at least a period of 14,000 years of use of an auspicious symbol. We are emerging from a period of darkness when white Christian colonialism descended upon many parts of the world. And in that time, there was violence of many, many sorts. From one perspective, what Hitler and his Nazis did was colonizer violence. They wanted to eradicate opposing identities and grasp resources which were beyond any stretch of the imagination they had no right to whatsoever. And this was typically the profile of a colonizer. But what we suffered from was not just physical colonization. We lost 80 million people in that period of time. We lost $45 trillion worth of wealth. But in addition to that, violence was perpetrated on an intellectual and an emotional level. And we have never yet had an opportunity to speak of that violence. In one way, I'm actually quite grateful to the gentleman who has brought this legislation, because it gives us an opportunity to address a missing dimension of the violence associated with the Hakenkreuz. And half of that violence is the conflation of the word swastika with the image of the Hakenkreuz. That was not done accidentally. It was done at a time when colonialists were conflating many good symbols, words, and ideas and giving them absolutely reprehensible, abhorrent equivalents in the English language. If I give you a very simple example, every single human being who's English speaking on the planet has heard of the word caste, and yet no one considers why is it that everybody has heard of that word. This is not an accident. It was a deliberate proliferation of a colonialist trope, and enshrined in it is violence. So when we speak with our Jewish friends, and I have the pleasure and honor of counting many of them almost as family. I spent a bit of time in Israel, 2 years. I was working just north of Herzliya, and I'm very, very deeply aware of the issues around the violence associated with the Hakenkreuz. But the other half of the story is that we have a story to tell. Every time that violent visual image is associated with the word swastika, we experience violence. It is an act of violence upon us. The appearance of this word swastika in this legislation is an act of violence. A person has chosen a language, and a language they are not familiar with, taken a word from it, ascribed an understanding to it without consulting the source civilization prior to incorporating it in legislation, and proceeded to try and push it through. This is an act of violence, and it's typical of a colonizing attitude which assumes the right to imprint a strawman character on the other. And fundamental to this whole episode of the swastika and its incorporation into legislation is this probably unconscious attitude which says that I can do this. I can inquire, I can require this word to be enshrined in legislation. And sitting here in London, remember the world's most efficient colonialists spread their wings from London, and there is still a subliminal, nuanced element of colonial supremacy. You know, I look across to this conversation in the US, and it strikes me that there is a dimension which I'm probably mischievous enough to toss in, but it strikes me that it's a little odd that we have a legislature which is colonialist, established on lands which are steeped in the blood of the original occupants. And yet in that land, we still have a white supremacist attitude which says that we can casually imprint and impose our perception of an alien symbol upon other people. And what happens? What happens is that we get people who are actually members of the colonized community. All of us are members of colonized communities, arguing and disputing amongst ourselves. I think unless we emphasize the dimension of violence in terms of this whole initiative, we will fail to convince our Jewish friends and relatives that actually there is a valid reason for this. I am absolutely confident that there is no member of the Jewish community who would wish to perpetuate this dimension of the violence that is associated with the swastika. The mention, we've just had our dear Buddhist friends speak of the swastika as being in the center of the chest. Swa in Sanskrit is the self. And this is not the self with the lowercase s, it is the Atma which is resident within. Swastika is a reference to a person or a tradition which is established in that self. So every action is fully self-aware, it is fully enlightened, and it is the highest state of human existence. How can we not accept that conflating that word with the symbol which is associated with horrors is not in itself an act of violence? It is an act of violence. And so since we are talking about legislation, since we are talking about very practical issues as well, there is a requirement to emphasize this dimension. I think if this dimension is emphasized, then we will move forward. There will be an acceptance that it's possible to detoxify the word swastika, the image of the swastika, and isolate it and separate it from the Hakenkreuz, so that the Jewish community and the Dharmic communities will be able to draw a clean line between the two of them and continue appreciating the auspicious and consign the horrific to the dustbin of history. I think it's probably a moment for me to take a breath now and allow some of what I've said to settle in. But
yes,
that would be my contribution from across the water, bearing in mind that time is of the essence. And so I've tried to concatenate and squeeze in as much as I was going to say into a very short monologue. So
no, absolutely. Thank you very much. And we'll continue the conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I want to bring in Reverend Wanshin. Your thought coming from multiple backgrounds, right? You have obviously a Buddhist background, but at the same time, you are, from a background, you have your parents were survivors of Holocaust, based on our last conversation. So maybe you want to share your perspective on from being an American, but also being from dual backgrounds. What are your thoughts on this?
Let me just correct you.
Yes, please.
My parents were not Holocaust survivors. However, I had family members. My mother's family were Sephardic Jews they would have been in North Africa, in the Middle East, etc. But I grew up as an observant Jew until I was in college, when, like a lot of college kids, I was exposed to a lot of things that I'd rather have than remaining observant. However, I did have family members who were survivors, as well as members who died in the Holocaust. And I'd like to relate to you that I also started studying Buddhism about the same time as I had my Haftorah, that I was being bar mitzvahed. That's when I started studying Buddhism. But it wasn't until in my mid-30s that 3.5 decades ago, that I was in Japan, that I was confronted as a Buddhist, as a Jewish person. I'm still Jewish. I still do Passover Seder, etc. But as a Jewish person and a Buddhist, that I was confronted with the swastika in Japan, being as Dr. Nakagaki mentioned, being on maps, being symbols in temples, et cetera, et cetera. As a Buddhist in America, I was never even aware of that, even though I had been a relatively devoted Buddhist follower. But in Japan, then I discovered, and Sensei, Nakagaki Sensei has behind him a very well-known temple in Japan, which is a combination of a Jodo Pure Land temple and a Tendai temple. So, I have a relationship to that. But I had that, as Mr. Hellman mentioned earlier, I had a similar reaction seeing the swastika, but feeling that sense as a person of Jewish heritage, feeling that gut reaction to that. So I took it upon myself to find out more about it, because as a Buddhist, you don't look at something as it is. You have to look for what is the reality of the situation, not just your perception of the situation. And that became part of my task. And I think that it's important that from a Buddhist perspective, it is, as we've all been speaking about it before, there's nothing I really have to add to that, because people have been so eloquent about it. But at the same time, we have to recognize that because we have that reaction doesn't mean that we cannot overcome it. And so for me, that was part of my task. And that was further enabled. I lived in Japan for over 6 years, over about 6 years, and I visit several times a year. So I'm there quite often. And I'm continually confronted with it. But now, after understanding it much better, I do not have that reaction at all. I don't have that visceral response to it. And part of that is because I have so many friends who are in the Hindu community and the Jain community, and I speak to those communities. I join with them at various times, and we realize that that's part of our common Dharmic heritage, that we share that symbol. And to me, that becomes a very important symbol of our shared faiths and values. We recognize that we have distinct differences in how we do certain things. However, we share many of those same common values. And one of those common values is the knowledge that the swastika has been misused, and the swastika has a very deep and penetrating value for many centuries. Last summer, in July, I believe it was, in one of the Zoom meetings that we do every Wednesday night, it's a discussion and meditation, et cetera, service. And I happened, not because of Nakagaki sensei or anything like that, but I happened to present the swastika as the subject of the discussion for the evening. Its value to our common traditions, et cetera. And it's really interesting because in our local Sangha here in upstate New York, the people are well educated, but nonetheless, most of them have no idea of the meaning of the swastika in the Dharmic sense. They only think of the Hakenkreuz, and I think that's one of the issues that we really have to address. How could I, as a Buddhist practitioner in the United States for several decades, never understand the meaning of the swastika until I had gone to Japan? It took me, nobody had ever mentioned it. I had not seen that image anywhere in the various Buddhist Sangha that I had participated in. So it's really interesting how we can, even being a Buddhist in America, you can be totally isolated from the true meaning. And so that's why I'm joining with everyone, because I feel that it's really an educational process.
And wonderfully captured. Thank you. I think the last point that you mentioned, that and I can tell you, even because Hindu tradition has a lot of symbols and deities and things like similar to other traditions, because of Diwali and other things, we are much more sensitized, or desensitized, however you want to call it, into using this symbol, because it becomes part of our rituals and part of our observances. But even here, we have seen that some people avoid it because they're like, oh, we don't want to cause any controversy, right? And I would tell you, that's not the right approach to take. I know that people are sensitive to this thing, but at the same time, we can't just erase ourselves. Somebody tomorrow was going to say like, oh, brown people are messed up. There's some crime is committed and they blame brown people, right? So we can't erase ourselves. So similarly,
that's already been done.
Yes, in certain ways, yes. So we can't just simply erase ourselves in that sense. So it's very important. So thank you for sharing that. Nareshji, from the Jain perspective, I want to hear your thoughts about the importance of the symbol. I know you've been participating in our sessions, but today is important as well. So maybe please unmute yourself and share your perspective.
You know, I've been former trustee of the Parliament of World Religions, and during last 15, 20 years, I've been involved in numerous informal dialogues about swastika. In Jainism, the swastika is a primary holy symbol. It's a symbol also of the seventh Tirthankar, or Jain. I think the closest word could be a prophet. Out of 24 prophets, the seventh prophet, his symbol was swastika. Swastika is all over in temples, holy books, even in business books. It's used all the time. And the four segments of the swastika, they represent the four destinies of living beings, where we can take birth, or like a human being, the celestial being, the beings of hell, and as well as Trianch, or birds, animals, and fish. That's what it. And the four sides, the last Tirthankar, Lord Mahavir, he grouped all human beings into four sons: the laymen, the laywomen, the monks or sadhus, and nuns, the sadhvis. So we have got four arms and four realms, and we keep on rotating among them. Now, drawing swastika all the time is an affirmation that I'm lucky to be a human being. I can rotate in these four realms based on how my karma fructifies. So, and my ultimate goal is to get out of this cycle. So on swastika, 3 dots are commonly put. And these 3 dots signify Samyak Darshan, Samyak Gyan, Samyak Charitra, or the right worldview or right faith, then right knowledge, and based on our worldview or our faith combined with knowledge, we chalk out a path for right action, right conduct, and that right conduct can lead us to get out of that cycle of birth and death. We call it nirvana. The Jain composite symbol was adopted by all sects of Jainism in 1975, which was the 2500th anniversary of Lord Mahavir. And in that, right at the top is the symbol of swastika. Now, this is really very important, because every time we draw, whether it's Diwali, even at Rakhi, in any festival, it's an affirmation that I recognize I'm in one of these 4 realms. I'm lucky to be a human being, and I am master of myself. I can draw a path to attain liberation from this cycle of birth and death. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you again for that. So now what I want to do is I have a couple of questions. Satishji, you want to maybe share, I think there was a similar attempt in Europe about many years ago about banning the swastika, right, as a symbol. It's just basically a symbol of hatred and stuff. Maybe you want to just share a quick minute about how Hindus and other groups kind of banded together to address a similar situation that we may be facing in the US as well.
Yes, this is actually a subject which rears its head fairly frequently. Most of our temples here are quite open with regard to the use of the symbol, but when the symbol is placed on a dhwaj or a flag or a banner or a pennant and placed outside of the buildings, as happens at festivals, then there is always a spike in terms of commentary and chatter and criticism. But I think the attitude that we've adopted, and which is successful, is that nobody has the right to define the other. If we are not being harmed, if we are not harming anybody else, and taking offense is a choice, then we come into a space where we actually create boundaries within which we can all comfortably exist. The fact that we choose a symbol which we have no responsibility for its conflation, there is no reason why we should discard our practices or adopt our practices to make some sort of recompense for the misdeeds of a completely unrelated community. Self-effacingness to that degree is a dodo sort of philosophy, isn't it? And so we've always been able to assert our right to religious freedom, because in terms of our symbols, in terms of their meaning, and in terms of their practice, and in terms of the manner in which the community has always used those symbols, there is nothing but auspiciousness. And so we've always been able to build a case on that basis. And I think that basis is a fairly stable and established manner in which this issue can be addressed. The freedom of religion, if it's harming nobody else, if it means anything, is the right for us to continue to use our swastik in the manner that we choose to use it. We have absolutely no, dare I say that, we have no cross to bear in this issue, shall we say. And so we've been able to do that. It's manifested, that approach has manifested in a number of cases. We had the assault on the community when evangelists tried to leverage the word caste against us. And again, we were able to establish with clarity that caste and the horrific caste concept was created by colonialists and deliberately conflated with Varna and Jati with exactly the same intention as the manner in which the word swastik was conflated with the Hakenkreuz. And these are established, identifiable psyops, I think they call them. And it's not too difficult a case to make. So I would heartily recommend that the freedom of religious belief and expression be the foundation stone upon which this challenge to legislation be made.
Great. And Dr. Nakagaki, adding to that point, when we were talking about the swastika, you also mentioned about the word Aryan, right? I think just like how we have to decolonize other concepts, removing the delinking swastika to Hakenkreuz, there's also this idea that the word Aryan has been also misused, right? Or wrongly associated with Hitler. So similarly, that, just like how you said, how Pandit Satish Sharma talked about the European legislation on swastika, you were also talking about how we need to also made an effort towards Aryan. So maybe you want to share about the Aryan concept as well, because how that is connected to swastika.
Yeah, first of all, yeah, thank you for asking that questions. Also, a little complicated, I guess, but yet simply Aryan originally means noble. I mean, for Buddhism, the Arya Satya is the truth. Arya is noble. So the actually swastika, when the Buddha carry, that's the Aryan symbol, actually. But then Aryan, that means noble, the most noble person who practice nobleness in their own life, and then so think, act, and everything is Aryan, the noble. That's the person to carry the swastika on the heart. So it's all connected. Actually, the Buddhist Sangha, used to be called Arya Sangha. So it's like actually the real Arya is probably Buddhists. That's the way we call it. And then so that's the way we focus on the practice too. The Buddhist society itself all try to be like a noble person, to be able to understand the suffering and bring the compassion, bring all the nonviolence and all those peace. That's really the Arya means. But then here, somehow the language theory, which I talked about the last time, but language theory itself create a big problem. And then also today, I guess Saba, I guess the mention about Max Muller, because especially when they translate used to be, especially this is a historical part, when they found the swastika, Sanskrit language. I'm sorry, Sanskrit language when the UK or England was occupied India, because what they found is the language of Sanskrit, which Sanskrit language is basically saying this language is more perfect than Latin or Greek. And then so it's just, the formation and all those things of the other language is a perfect language, more like than the Latin and Greek. But then so the question is, for them is it cannot be, because Europe should be the better than any other place. So then how can you prove that? I mean, then that's the theory that they started. How can you compare, the one language is superior or it looks much better than the other? So how can it be possibly to say we are the brothers and sisters? So Max Muller's thoughts was actually they decide to create one before, meaning the before the Sanskrit, there is a proto-language type of things. And then, but so that language is actually went to the one side, go to the, India, but the other side go to the Europe. So actually both came from the same language. That's nowadays it's called Proto-Indo-European language. But then the Max Muller called the Proto-Indo-European now as Aryan. So Aryan language is actually equal to Proto-Indo-European language. So that's the words Aryan was used. And then the Max Muller is a linguist, and he knows what it means, the words Aryan, because he has been translated a lot of Buddhist book too. So we learn the Max Muller's name as a Buddhist students when you study English, and then that's the earliest translation of the sutra into English. But then so he knows exactly what the Arya means, how important the words are. So that's why Arya means really superior than, like a Buddha's symbol, more like. So that's why he brought that language itself is the Aryan language. So that's why, the European language, or, same as the Sanskrit language, we are the brothers, and then we are all nice, the brother. That's the kind of a simple, I mean, I should say a little bit more complicated, but make it simple that way. But then, so that Aryan itself has become associated with the white supremacy. So that itself is also a totally wrong way of understanding Arya. So once Aryan is already wrong, and then also swastika itself is wrong. I mean, for me, the common sense for the, when you learn something, you wanted to know what it means, really. When you have a definition first, right? Normally, when you start arguing, what is the definition of swastika? What is the definition of Aryan? What is the definition of Hakenkreuz? I mean, those three are very important understanding. The Hakenkreuz definitely people don't know. Even the when they call swastika for the Nazi Germany symbol, they never know that's a cross. Most of the American people never see cross in a swastika or the Hakenkreuz. So when you say Hakenkreuz, then cross is right there in the words. So the translate words matters actually. Some people think that the words is not matter. If you say the words is not matter, then you can say anything what you like. But actually the words itself, how you call the words, that's the understanding of coming together. So right now, understanding of the so-called, I would say Hakenkreuz is equal to Hitler. It's the same person. But then in the Buddhist, of course, swastika is equal to the Buddha. So it's actually that particular one is there, but at least the swastika maybe belong to the Buddha, but then Hakenkreuz maybe you can belong to the Hitler. But then when you say swastika, the word swastika has to be the good meaning of the Buddha or Jain, the Hindu, Buddhist, Jains, or the other people use as a good meaning of swastika. So if whoever say when you say swastika as a very well beings, and then you cannot use the words to say the negative thing. If you talk about violence, they have to use the words Hakenkreuz. That's the way it should be, at least. So first we need make sure the start from the words, and then maybe you can go to the other symbols too. But then the words I think is very important. So
very, very important point you made. Words, the power of words is extremely important. You know, the use of words and the power of words and the context, all those things are extremely important. So thank you, Dr. Nakagaki, for shedding light on that. Nareshji, I know in the Jain tradition, just like how, like for example, in the Hindu tradition, there's a saying, Karnavanta Vishwamaryam, which means that make the entire world noble. Okay, so in a tradition that says Karnavanta Vishwamaryam, with the idea of making the entire world noble, why would the word Arya be used wrongly, correct? So similarly, I know in the Jain tradition, there are similar usages. So what are your thoughts on both the swastik, like the usage of swastik, but also the word Arya? You're mute, so if you can unmute.
See, Arya, as Dr. Nakagaki explained, it's kind of similar meaning. Arya is noble. Actually, I know a Jain who has named his grandson as Arya. Okay. Swastika, the meaning we have discussed. The question comes, real question is, how do we promote this kind of understanding? And explaining, now we are all sitting, we all know, we understand both the meanings. But the moment I go outside my door and talk to the next door neighbor, and the moment they see a figure like swastika right away, swastika hate, something happened, who did it? You know, all that thing will go on. Now, most of the people are getting educated through the media. Media likes negative things. And the moment there is a little hate crime or somewhere swastika is inscribed, it'll be in the newspaper and that's all people know. Now, can we influence the media that every time they write about the hate crime component of swastika, they also bring in that unfortunately it was the Nazis who used it, but bulk of the world uses it as a pious symbol, that kind of thing. You know, that's, to me, that's more important. And otherwise, the meaning of the words, because they are from Indic traditions, the meanings are fairly similar. You know, as I said, in our case, drawing swastika is more like an affirmation that I'm lucky to be a human being. According to our philosophy, you can get nirvana only through the birth as a human being, not as a Devi or Devta. Still, you have to come back. So that kind of a thing, that's what would be more important. How could we influence? Now, just to about, I think, 12, 13 years ago, our newspaper asked me if we can educate people about a couple of Indian festivals, because the Indians, or population of Indians was rising in our town, and they wanted to educate other people also that here are the people and they have different festivals and different focus. Now, you know, Diwali and Holi are coming more and more in news. So what I did is I invited at my home a couple of Jews, a couple of Hindus, a couple of Muslims and Christians, and we did decoration, and in that decoration, swastika was also there. And the newspaper covered almost about 2 pages because people represented were of various religions. And I'm going to read one sentence, which is from the paper, and it says, in preparation, Sarla Jain, that's my wife, placed the traditional banner above her entrance archway. The banner welcomes guests with the words Shubh Deepavali or Happy Diwali and the ancient Hindu Jain religious symbol of swastika. So I'm not a scholar like many on this panel, but I'm a little activist. I look at it that way, that we have to create opportunities to bring this symbol in visibility and then explain it to them. People are not going to come to us. All they read is newspapers, and all they read is the hate component of it. In Rutherford, on Jewish synagogue, somebody spray painted this symbol a few years ago. And the all hell and newspapers covered this story for months, but when I had an opportunity, we placed that symbol right in the view. The moment you enter, you see it. That kind of a thing. We will have to look for, create opportunities and educate people. I attended a seminar on nonviolence in White House, that annexe where offices are there. I think about 6-7 years ago. It was a full day event. And in that, it was a seminar on nonviolence. And John Lewis was there. And we talked to him about the budget, trimming the budget for wars, particularly in Afghanistan and all, by 1 or 2%, and spend that money on educating the people for peace and nonviolence, particularly in Asia. Okay, and in that seminar, the American Jewish Committee distributed a flyer on swastika. Actually, the email that I have sent you, you will find, I think, I don't remember, I think it's number 2 item. It's American Jewish Committee flyer on swastika. So we need to, in our colleges, our students are, more Asian students are coming to universities and colleges. They are not exposed to these different views. Suddenly they put a swastika in their dorm room and the issues come up. So some of us, Hindus, Buddhists, if we can make these flyers, giving it to our students, let them share, that could be a way to educate. Unfortunately, I don't know if we can emphasize on, I spoke a little bit about emphasizing on the media, if we can at some level, but can we emphasize the education system also, that through social studies or something, they can learn about, they can learn a little bit about swastika, that kind of a thing.
It's a great point.
Yeah,
exactly. So you hit up a very, very, very important point. So that we naturally transitioned into the next one, which is great. My question to the panelists was going to be, how do we go about going out of this dialogue? What do we do next, right? We can all talk to each other. It's everyone understands the importance, but how do we go back to the mainstream and start educating? So media is important. The educational aspects, school curriculum is important. That's why working with the New York legislators, as far as New York is concerned, is also important. Maybe I'll talk, Reverend Manchin, maybe you can share your thoughts on this particular aspect of education and awareness. And by the way, for the people who are watching, you can also go to the KONA website, kona.org/swastika. We have created some resources. There's a booklet that has been created. You can print it out and you can share it. So we have been sharing this with various types of constituents, especially last Diwali, when we had our festival of Diwali, we shared this with some of the local townships and stuff. So, but back to you, Reverend Manchin.
Well, as you were speaking, I had been a professor at Bard College at Simon's Rock for many years, and I retired just a few years ago. And I'm still asked to give lectures and that sort of thing. And so I was thinking that someone had written me the other day saying, could I do a lecture coming up in, I think it's April now. Could I do a lecture in April for 3 hours as part of the service? And I immediately thought, okay, there's an opportunity to do a lecture on the swastika to the students in the Buddhist class, because I know that in Buddhism, as it's taught in the United States, you never see it. I personally went to Taisho Daigaku, Taisho University in Tokyo, attended there, and so I know the what was taught there. But I know that in the United States, I don't know of a single professor in Buddhism that teaches about the swastika and its relevance. And now that's partly because you have a long period of time to number of years that occupies Buddhism, and you have a short period of time to teach. So people have to put a priority on things. But I was thinking there's an opportunity for me to express it to that particular group of students. And I remember when I was teaching courses on Buddhism, I did mention the swastika, and I would go through it, and I would get what we might expect, where people were sort of very disturbed, and even had students saying, well, I'm going to tell my parents about this. They're going to be very upset when they find out, you know. But I think that perhaps, and I think I'd mentioned previously, that what we need to do is not just teach just to my students, but to teach to the teachers. I think that a lot of the people who are teaching Buddhism or religion in general, let's say a general religion course, they're not including that in their curriculum. So it may be that we have to start teaching the teachers, not teaching the students per se. And I don't know exactly, some of the other people might have some ideas, but I think that that's a good place to start, is to teach it to the teachers, as opposed to just I'll be doing it to, you know, a few dozen students perhaps in April, but to make sure that we include that in organizations such as the American Association of Religion. I don't know that the swastika has been the subject of a paper in that organization, as an example. You know, it maybe it has, but I haven't seen it listed in many years.
No, you're right. And this is exactly what we need to do. Teach the, train the trainers in that sense, right? So teach the teachers, teach the students, but teach the teachers because they'll have a bigger impact. Yes, Naresh, you go ahead.
Yeah, a very good point Reverend Monshin has made. In New Union Theological Seminary in New York, they every year during summer, they get about 40, 50 teachers from all over the country and train them in diversity. I have spoken to them 3-4 times, and actually I did not refer swastika, but in future, if I have an opportunity, I will. But I did talk to them when the session starts in September. Many of the Jains are celebrating the festival of Paryushan, where their parents are fasting. And they were surprised. I said, the moment you have, remember, half of these kids are eating once a day, and that is at the very start of the session. And the teacher said probably that was the best take-home point they heard during the day about these cultural aspects. Religion dominates, our culture, how we behave, how we talk, what our values are. So that's a very good point. I think we might like to look for these opportunities where teachers are being trained for diversity training or something like that, just like they do in corporate America.
Exactly. I think that's a good. So these are, as part of our campaign, our Swastika Education and Awareness campaign that we are, this events that we're organizing, this is going to be definitely something that we're going to be putting together. And I think stories, educational seminars, these types of events, conferences, publications, documentary, all of those things. So it's not just a linear path. It'll be like across the board. So what I want to do is now come up to wrap up the session. I want to give the panelists maybe a few minutes to kind of give your closing thoughts. So we'll start with Dr. Nakagaki. You want to give your closing thoughts about this panel and what's, any final thoughts you have?
Well, yeah, thank you. It was enjoyable to see the exchange, the different views, and then how it should be up, do the campaign. But I actually talked to somebody, my friend. So what they say is actually all you need is millions of dollars. So you can use all those money to promote, like all the education, everything. So why maybe one of the reasons that, all the Europe, they wanted to solve, because, after World War II, you have to solve everything. So I'm sure they spend a lot of money for education of the swastika has to be evil. I mean that because otherwise who who is putting all those monies and everything, and then so it's just, I mean, that's not me saying. I was kind of simply told, oh, you just have the money, a lot of money, then you can just do whatever you like to do. It could be, that could be true, because you know, some of the budget, probably what they do for the controlling the, you know, finishing the World War II, they probably spend a lot of way of propaganda. I mean, even like Hitler himself used a lot of money, and then all those, you know, the people's voices and everything. But then that's probably the one of the business part is actually, well, although this is a, you know, the not business part should be, but yet that you know, we need some way to bring the campaign and so forth. Then probably more you seriously, if we wanted to do something, yeah, I'm sure that we need you know, more capital to be able to, and not just the money itself, but also the people's mind set should be changed. So which means we need to really start with the education and practice and so forth. And then so as I mentioned before too, but the reason why I wrote this book is actually, you know, promote a dialogue. It's not really necessarily pushing one view or the others, but then both views should be recognized, basically, in my opinion. It's what one view doesn't disappear because there's another view, but rather it should be able to understand what is a swastika, what is a Hakenkreuz, and then that should be clear. And then the education, some people will still try to push one view. You know, it's like right, purple, I mean, sorry, I said that from the beginning, but the red or blue in the United States. So if the red is right, or then the, you know, blue is always wrong or something like that. So, but then instead we should have a little more, you know, purple area, or black and white versus, you know, the gray area. And so was something to be able to recognize both. It's not just simply one try to, you know, push others out. I mean, that's the way they try to, I guess, control the, you know, the solution of the World War II too. You know, who is wrong? I mean, the people who won the war, they are the right one. People who lost the war, of course, they're the wrong one. I mean, so that's the way the system works, right and wrong. But then yet, nowadays, as everything comes together, like an interfaith week, I mean, we have all different things. So if we say, oh, this, my part is right, but the other is not. But even like I talk a little interface, you know, the development too. First, the interface does not include any of the, you know, the Buddhism or Hindus or even, you know, other religions. I mean, other than, what do you call it, Old Testament and New Testament, right? So the Jewish and then Christians started the dialogue. So those are interfaith originally. And then later it became also the part of the Islamic tradition, become part of it. And then, so that's an interface. But then there's a certain understanding among them, like a justice is very important, so forth. But yet, when it comes to the including the East for the part of the interface, all those things that they said or agree is not necessarily agreed. And so it's actually a lot of interesting part of the things is, you know, when you have a solution can only discuss in Europe, America, I mean, that's the solution. But now, we were talking about the global, you know, world. So which means we should include East. And we do have a 1/3 of the population of the world. And then those are the people who use the swastika as a sacred symbol. So, you know, this is a time is changing. Even like a United Nations part, I thought it was interesting in a way, like, you know, the nuclear weapons, you know, so just the last 22nd of January, at least nuclear weapons itself is the illegal. Having a nuclear weapons or producing a nuclear weapon is those are illegal in the international law. But then whether, you know, the big country who carry the nuclear weapons follow or not is another question. But yet all the other country, you know, they are not the winning country or small country maybe, but then they start saying more voice. And then this is kind of a global issues. And then you know, we talk about harmony, but in order to create a real harmony, then we need to really talk about it, what's going on, what's really, before is a one view is pushing everybody else. But then now I think you should start recognize the different views are existing in this society. And we're all human beings and we try to learn from each other, so that's why I think it's things that I would like to really see is more dialogue, more discussion, and more people to understand what's really going on. Because right now, as if the symbol itself killed millions of people. It's not. It's actually the Hitler, or actually even like a human beings of the hate or how much of the deep greed that we have that kill people. It's not the symbol doesn't kill anything, but symbol is really focusing on what drive people do certain things. So that if the correct understanding of symbol, then that swastika symbol again to bringing more peace and happiness instead of a violence and the white supremacy racist type of thing. Those are all totally wrong with in a sense from the understanding of original swastika and Aryan that we're talking about. So and then versus Christian, the cross itself has been the part of the anti-Semitism symbol. So that's also part of the missing cross from the swastika or the Hakenkreuz, I mean. So anyway, thank you so much.
Very important dialogue. Thank you, Dr. Nakagaki. Pandit Satish Sharma ji, can you maybe just couple of minutes of your final thoughts?
Yes, thank you very much. As I said, it's been an illuminating and intriguing conversation. Just to try and wrap up with a few thoughts, we have an issue to deal with. And the issue, as I see it, has two dimensions. One is to understand exactly what's at play here, and then to be able to respond to the two possible outcomes. One outcome being that this word is withdrawn from the proposed legislation, the other outcome being that it's included in the legislation. And so we will need to have a game plan in play for both of those. But in order to understand what's happening, a slightly different perspective could be helpful. Toxic minorities colonize by divide and rule. England was a tiny little island, and yet there was a time when they say that the sun didn't set on the British Empire. And the way in which they did this was through the very careful manipulation of words. And we have Aryan has been spoken about. Aryan is an adjective, but by creating it as a noun and saying it is the name of a group of people, you can then create isolation and difference. You create two groups. And if you have two groups, you can then create an Aryan invasion theory. And then you have a continent which can be broken down by a toxic philosophy of divide and rule. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to reverse the harm that is still being perpetuated by residual colonialist tropes. The African American community are slowly beginning to come to grips with the notion that there are tropes about them which have their roots in colonialist supremacy. The Jewish community have been fighting colonialist tropes for a long period of time. The blood libel and many other libels that are targeted at them are actually divide and rule tropes. And this word, the swastika, and its misapplication is actually a colonialist trope. Hitler didn't use the word, the British used the word, and they used this word and contorted it and twisted it at a time when colonialist ideologies were prevalent. So this trope has to be dismantled by our generation, and it has to be done with as much courage as the other colonized communities have actually approached dismantling of their tropes. So hopefully this word will be withdrawn, because it should be understood that to actually put this word into law is it itself an act of violence. But let's assume for a moment that people don't understand that to be the case. Then we need to respond to take control of this conversation. And I would propose that if this word does enter into legislation, the date that it enters into legislation is the day that nationally and internationally, globally, all of the Dharmic traditions should commemorate a swastik day. And let's really up the ante and teach everybody what it is that has been done and how harmful perpetuating this trope is. What we're faced with is decolonizing the word swastik in the same way that we're engaged in decolonizing many of the other tropes created by Bharat. So it's a wonderful task, and this is something that's going to fall to your generation, you masters of tweets and all those things that you do with your thumbs on these little phones. You should be able to dismantle this in a matter of months if you put your mind to it. So I'm very, very positive about it. There are many people who have already written about the processes of decolonizing, and I think we're joined today by Conrad Elst, who I notice is a part of the team of attendees. He's done masterful work on the philosophy and the practice of decolonizing language. And so I think you have superb guides to follow. And I'm confident with your energy and commitment and the blessings of many of the elders, this will be something that we will look back on and say, yes, those guys did a really good job. They dismantled the colonialist trope of the swastika as an item of hate literature.
Wonderful, thank you. Reverend Monshin.
Well, I was thinking of putting together Nakagaki Sensei and Pandit Sharma, and that is that this is a wonderful opportunity also for all of us in the Dharmic traditions to recognize our shared heritage and to do this together. And as was mentioned earlier, the Abrahamic traditions entered into interfaith, and only later did those of us of the Eastern traditions become part of that larger dialogue. And so together, we have a much greater impact. We've decolonized by virtue of the fact that we're joining together with a shared sense of purpose, not only about the swastika, but also about our faith traditions and what they share in the values that they contain, which has to do with humility and generosity and harmony and service. That's what we share together. And doing that, we become much greater, and we throw off the shackles that Pandit Sharma was speaking of, but we have to do it together, not through individual action, but through collective action. And now is the perfect time to do that. Look at this bill as an opportunity, as opposed to look what they're doing to us. Not to victimize us, but to use it as an opportunity.
Yep, absolutely. This is a great time, and I'm glad that we're talking about this because, and we talked about this offline a couple of days ago about creating, more opportunities for the Dharmic traditions to come together on various issues and topics and collective action. So thank you for that. Nareshji? Unmute yourself, please.
If I have to speak to people of my group, what do we do? As I explained the other day, the Jaina adopted, or they replaced swastika from the composite Jain symbol and inserted Om. They replaced it. Okay, not to offend Jewish brothers, and this was done in early 80s, 1980s. Now today, more people of Asian origin are coming here in universities, and we do have more opportunities. I would say, just to avoid aversion and initiate a dialogue, if when we draw swastika, if we can put in something like dots in Jains, so at least it won't be taken right away as swastika and anti-Semitic symbol, but a curiosity, oh, it could be something else. Let's find out what it is. That's one thing I would suggest. Spelling, if we can spell it instead of SW as SV, that's another thing. And then dialogues, and help those people who, for example, if there is an anti-Semitic incident in my town and the police is dealing with it, can we have a dialogue with police also and explain to them, here is a tradition? I understand that the police training system in Chicago is doing it. They have made several videos, and they show it. If you go to a Hindu home, what could you expect? They would show them for training. And I think I briefly referred to an incident in George Washington University where a Jewish student who went to India on a tour and brought a beautiful bronze swastika and displayed in his dorm room. And somebody complained. Ultimately, the student was suspended. And the president of the South Asia Society, her father was my friend. And she spoke to her father, he spoke with me. And first thing I pointed out to him what Baba Jain referred to Jewish-Hindu Summit Declaration. And I sent her those 2 pages, and fortunately she could Google and find that book. Baba said that it's available online, but she could Google and find it. So she presented that to the committee, and I'm going to read few lines of the letter which she wrote to the committee. Priya Jain and Nabil Chaudhary, President and Financial Officer of George Washington University, South Asia Society. Today, we heard a case about a student in Zeta Beta Tau fraternity at George Washington University who was suspended for hanging a swastika in his dorm door. As President and Financial Officer of South Asia Society at the very same school, we are outraged by this ruling. We know for a fact that this man was visiting India for purely recreational purposes and to understand and appreciate South Asian culture. The swastika symbol is predominantly holy, sacred, and auspicious symbol in the Hindu, Buddhist, and Jain religions, even before it had ever been adopted by the Nazi Party. Because of our shared heritage and our equal love for every single culture in this country and worldwide, we are appalled by this outrageous oversight in the ruling for this innocent individual. As representatives of the student body of this university, we are more than willing to offer any support we can to the defense of this man and the justification of the clearly Hindu, Buddhist, Jain religion symbol this man chose to display in his own personal space. We are frankly disgusted by the conduct of this case and are willing to do whatever possible to right this wrong. And at that time, 2 very prominent George Washington University law school professors, John Benzoff and Jonathan Turley. Jonathan Turley is all the time on TV. They expressed concern about this action on legal grounds and First Amendment issues. So all I can submit is whenever these things are, we may be on lookout as leaders and give them full support. And that support also helps in bringing this education. Surprisingly, in GW, they did not know. And now a lot of those professors are educated through this case and bringing this information to them.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it takes incidents and laws and stuff like that as an opportunity to educate people. So we should, rather than playing victim, as the esteemed panelists had mentioned, we should look at this as an opportunity. And I'm certainly energized by everybody on the panel. And all of you are very senior, experienced spiritual leaders and community leaders. And I really want to thank all of you for sharing your perspectives. And collective action is definitely in our mindsets. And what I wanted to do is, just in terms of the closing thoughts, I'll bring in Shohini Sharkar again, who's going to give a vote of thanks for the event. Once again, just from a logistics perspective, these videos are available on Facebook. In the next few days, we will be putting them on YouTube. You can also go to kona.org/swastika to get resources on that. And finally, if you are interested in helping us with the campaign, you can sign up as a partner. We have about 20-something organizations as coalition partners for this particular campaign. You can go again, kona.org/swastika. And again, on behalf of Hewa Foundation and Kona, I want to thank everybody. And Shohini, please close us out.
Sure. On behalf of the Coalitions of Hindus of North America and the Hewa Foundation, I would like to sincerely thank all of the distinguished speakers who dedicated their time not only to us over the past week, but also to this important cause. While we see a short presentation, it takes weeks, months, and years of research to put together all the learning and research that goes into this cause. And thank you to all the attendees who have joined us from all over the world. It is your support and interest that allows us to continue the work we do. Please visit kona.org/swastika to learn more information and see how you can support this cause. Thank you once again, and namaste.